With the allegations of Vince McMahon going from a civil to a federal suit, I think it's important for everyone to hear the legal complaint against Mr. McMahon. This video, I will be reading the entire legal complaint against Vince McMahon. Viewer discretion is advised. This will be dealing with sexual assault, as well as other troubling things. Plaintiff Janelle Grant, by and through her undersigned counsel, hereby files a complaint against the defendants World Wrestling Entertainment, known as WWE or The Company, in this lawsuit. Vincent K. McMahon, known as McMahon, and John Laurinaitis, alleging as follows. Plaintiff Janelle Grant is a former employee of WWE who was the victim of physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault, and trafficking at WWE. Ms. Grant is filing this lawsuit not just to address her own suffering, but also to act for those who are afraid to speak out. WWE's billionaire founder and executive chairman, defendant Vincent K. McMahon, lived in the penthouse duplex in Ms. Grant's apartment building. The two met in March of 2019 when Ms. Grant was dealing with profound grief and struggling financially. After devoting years to around-the-clock caregiving, her parents passed away. On top of that, she was unemployed and her family home was lost in her parents' bankruptcy. After her family had passed away, Ms. Grant dedicated herself to finding gainful employment. Neighbors in the building provided career advice and sought her assistance with personal events. Ms. Grant used these non-paying roles and volunteer work in the community initiatives to build her resume. The building's resident manager wanted to help. She messaged McMahon to ask whether he would talk to her, sharing that Ms. Grant had been through hardships and would do great things if given a fresh start. McMahon enthusiastically responded, quote, "Hell yes." McMahon befriended Miss Grant before giving her hopes of a new life with promises of a yet-to-be-determined role in WWE, and showering her with attention and assurances, along with gifts like a VIP experience at WrestleMania. But what seemed like a dream in the spring of September of 2019 quickly became a nightmare. As McMahon dangled career-making and life-changing promises in front of Miss Grant, he demonstrated an increasing lack of boundaries. During several meetings that were ostensibly about a potential job at WWE, he greeted her in his underwear, touched her, and repeatedly asked for hugs, and spent hours sharing intimate details about his personal life. McMahon warned Miss Grant to keep their closeness, quote, closeness, a secret, lest rumors lead to public troubles, and added that while he protects loyal people, he has had world-class legal resources on speed dial to deal with people who became a problem. As such, when McMahon pushed Miss Grant for a physical relationship in return for a long-promised WWE employment at WWE, she felt trapped in an impossible situation, submitting to McMahon's sexual demands or face ruin. Miss Grant feared she had everything to lose and faced negative consequences no matter what happened. After succumbing to the pressure for a physical relationship, Miss Grant was slotted into an entry-level position as an administrative coordinator, a position McMahon had created for her in WWE's legal department. Miss Grant began work at the role on June 17th, 2019. Miss Grant remained in that role with the exception of a temporary relocation to XFL, which is the Extreme Football League, until McMahon verbally directed her to transfer to the Talent Relations Department, reporting to defendant John Laurinaitis on March 9th, 2021. During a conversation on the same day, McMahon explained that her presence in the legal department was effectively delaying efforts to hire a new general counsel for the company. McMahon and Laurinaitis informed Ms. Grant that she would be promoted to Vice President of Operations in the Talent Relations Department, providing her with an organizational chart reflecting this decision. Shortly after, they informed her that number 13 again. Shortly thereafter, they informed her that they needed her to begin at a level lower as a director, but promised her promotion to vice president after a 12-month period. Despite Miss Grant's expressions of unhappiness and attempts to end the sexual relationship, and while she came to the understanding that McMahon expected the physical relationship to continue as part of her employment, she had no idea how sordid it would become, nor how the psychological torture and physical violence would leave her feeling helpless, isolated, and trapped. In March 2020, McMahon began sharing sexually explicit photographs and videos of Miss Grant, including pornographic content he recorded with other men both inside and outside of the company, including members of the television production tech team, executive producer, and world famous athletes and former UFC heavyweight champions with whom WWE was actively trying to sign to a new contract. Given McMahon's omnipotent position at WWE, coercion was inherent in his increasingly depraved sexual demands. Particularly, while McMahon was CEO of WWE and Miss Grant was employed as an entry-level coordinator in the legal department, McMahon recruited individuals to have sexual relations with Miss Grant in he or with one of two of them. Directed Miss Grant to visit defendant Laurinaitis prior to the start of work days for sexual encounters, and expected and directed Miss Grant to engage in sexual activities at the WWE headquarters, even during work hours. All this time, McMahon ordered Miss Grant to keep their relationship a secret unless otherwise instructed, including lying to maintain whatever cover stories he fabricated. McMahon's assurances that Miss Grant was safe and independent rang hollow in the light of his efforts to isolate her from friends and attempts to chip away at her identity until it was replaced with his desired role for her as his quote bitch, his quote fantasy, and or his quote porn star, while occasionally intermixing softer descriptors like girlfriend and quote baby and even quote love when convenient. He exercised complete ownership and control over both her personal and professional lives. McMahon also subjected Miss Grant to acts of extreme cruelty and degradation that caused Miss Grant to disassociate and become numb to reality in order to survive the horrific encounters. As one of the examples of McMahon's extreme depravity, on May 9, 2020, he defecated on Miss Grant during a threesome and then commanded her to continue pleasuring his quote friend with feces in her hair and running down her back, while McMahon went to the bathroom to shower off. Upon his return from the bathroom, McMahon and his quote friend actively resumed the threesome, which lasted over an hour and a half, while Miss Grant remained covered in McMahon's filth. While McMahon's friend left, McMahon ordered her to stay and continue to sexually gratify him. In June 2021, McMahon and defendant Laurinaitis sexually assaulted Miss Grant inside Laurinaitis' office and WWE's headquarters while colleagues were busy at their desk. Behind a locked door, the two men cornered her and pulled her between them, forcibly touched her before ultimately putting her on top of a table between them. She begged them to stop, but they forced themselves on her, each taking turns restraining her for the other, while saying no means yes and quote take it, bitch. Unsurprisingly, others at WWE knew what was going on, but instead of intervening to protect Miss Grant, WWE actively sought to conceal the wrongdoing. In January of 2022, McMahon told Miss Grant that his wife had found out about their relationship, purportedly to avoid divorce, negative publicity, and other repercussions. McMahon said that Miss Grant's time at WWE was at an end, but that he wanted her to sign an NDA to ensure her silence on, among other things, his personal misconduct. In the days ahead, McMahon put Miss Grant under immense pressure to sign, saying that refusing would not only jeopardize McMahon, his family, the company, but that she'd surely become a public headline, suffer reputational ruin, including from the pornographic content McMahon had captured, and face McMahon's legal repercussions. Conversely, McMahon reassured her that her signature would ensure his continued support and protection and safeguard her reputation. Ultimately, Miss Grant succumbed to the pressure and signed the NDA in exchange for payments, which McMahon later stopped making. Even after pursuing Miss Grant out of the company and muzzling her with an NDA, McMahon continued efforts to exploit her, including attempts to traffic her to WWE star who would be in New York City for a live event and TV taping on March 22nd. Understandably, the defendant's predatory conduct has left Miss Grant crippled both physically and mentally, including from debilitating symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and suicidal ideations. These symptoms led to her termination from her subsequent job, ruining her building's operations during her inability to leave her home for weeks at a time. Despite McMahon's promises of reputational ruin, WWE appears to have leaked information that led to the public disclosure of her name by a media blogger who cited quote, a source in hashtag WWE with direct knowledge of this situation, which upon information and belief was an overt intimidation tactic against Miss Grant. WWE has also attempted to sweep the matter under the rug following the media reports that Vince McMahon was involved in a hush money payment scandal. WWE released a statement on June 2022 announcing that a special committee of its board of directors was investigating the alleged misconduct in appointing Stephanie McMahon as interim CEO and interim chairwoman. In this capacity, Miss McMahon publicly affirmed her commitment to doing everything in power to help her special committee complete its work and to implement its findings. She also declared the importance of a safe and collaborative workplace. Notwithstanding this public statement, the investigation was a sham. In November of 2022, WWE touted the conclusion of the special committee investigation into the misconduct, yet the special committee never even bothered to interview Miss Grant or request any documents, despite Miss Grant stating she would cooperate. In the SEC filing, the company tried to divert attention away from McMahon's abuse of a woman by focusing on the technical issue of how hush money was accounted for. In the words of the company, the issue was an immaterial accounting error related to certain payments that Mr. McMahon agreed to during this period from 2006 to 2022. Through all this trauma, Ms. Grant has endured a profound suffering in silence, fearing exploitation, loss of security, and the fear of facing wrath of WWE and McMahon's army of attorneys if she were to come forward and bring to light the egregious acts of detailed herein. As time passed, Miss Grant seeks. As time passed, and Miss Grant seeks to hold defendants accountable for their reprehensible and unlawful acts for her own sake and others. Miss Grant seeks a declaratory judgment that her NDA is invalid under federal and state laws and asserts claims other laws, including including the Trafficking and Victim Protections Act. Plaintiff Janelle Grant. This is the parties here. Plaintiff Janelle Grant, a Connecticut citizen, is a former WWE employee, worked there from 2019 to 2022. Vincent McMahon is a Connecticut citizen, co-founder of the WWE in the 1980s, served on the board of directors from 1980 to September of 2023. He's currently executive chairman on the board of TKO Holdings. Defendant, World Wrestling Council. It just kind of explains here what WWE is. I think we all know that. Defendant John Laurinaitis is named as well. Let's scroll down here. Non-party officers, employees of WWE at the time of the relevant WWE corporate officer number 2 was a high-ranking employee at WWE who made hiring decisions, conducted prospective employee interviews, and maintained a significant control of their personal decisions. WWE corporate officer number 2 worked in the same capacities during Miss Grant's employees with WWE. This individual is referred to herein as corporate officer number 2. This is the information about corporate officer number 1 was a high-ranking WWE employee board member. So it was employee and a board member during Miss Grant's employment with the WWE. WWE corporate officer number 1 continued working in high-ranking positions in connections with the September 12th, 2023 merger. This individual is herein referred to as WWE corporate officer number 1. Corporate officer number 3 was a high-ranking employee and a board member during Miss Grant's employment. This individual referred to herein as corporate WWE corporate officer number 3. At all times relevant, WWE corporate officer number 4 was a high-ranking employee who worked with legal affairs for the company. So number 4 was a legal affairs person. Held the position. Sorry, let's go back. WWE corporate officer number 4 held a position from the time Miss Grant was initially employed with the WWE until sometime in 2020. Individual as referred to herein as corporate official number 4. WWE superstar is a professional wrestling superstar who performs at WWE branded wrestling events. During the time Miss Grant's employment, McMahon signed WWE superstar to a new booking contract with the WWE. This individual is referred to herein as WWE superstar. Okay, so we got a few different players here. Corporate officers 1 through 4, WWE superstar as well. All right. Okay, this court's jurisdiction over the action pursuant to U.S. statute 1331 because Miss Grant claims under the Trafficking Victim Protections Act and caused her actions for declarations under. Okay, so like I think this is where they're kind of just saying these are the acts that protect Miss Grant. Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the Speak Out Act. So let's see. Factual allegation. Okay. These are the factual allegations. Miss Grant's history with McMahon and Laurinaitis in WWE. Miss Grant's introduction to Vince McMahon turns into a 2-hour meeting between a potential entry-level employee and a billionaire CEO. Prior to having any involvement with WWE, Miss Grant was dealing with the profound grief of loss of her parents, whom she cared for as she was their soul. Her family passed away. Miss Grant dedicated herself to finding gainful employment. We did read. I know this is. So I'm going to take a pause here for a second. I know this is similar to what we read earlier, but this is just how these things are written sometimes. So let's get into it. After her family passed away, Miss Grant dedicated to herself to finding gainful employment. During this time, Miss Grant often ran into McMahon's 2 personal assistants in her building, one of whom was a former grade school classmate of Miss Grant. Miss Grant's closest friend in the building was the resident manager. That individual referred to herein as resident manager. Simply similar in personality, Miss Grant and the resident manager bonded over stories of adversity as they coordinated community initiatives in the building together. Resident manager was aware of Miss Grant's efforts to obtain employment. In March 2019, Miss Grant remained unsuccessful. Let me start over there. In March 2019, Miss Grant remained unsuccessful in securing long-term employment. Resident manager offered to help Miss Grant, suggesting she could reach out to defendant McMahon in case he could assist, and texted him to see if they'd be willing to speak with Miss Grant, providing advice about employment. McMahon responded enthusiastically and proposed a meeting time with Miss Grant discussing employment. Resident manager passed along Miss Grant's resume to McMahon ahead of the prospective meeting. Ahead of the meeting, resident manager advised Grant to be energetic as McMahon is big on energy, and talk to McMahon no differently than she talks to the resident manager. On or about March 23rd, 2019, Miss Grant arrived for the meeting in McMahon's condo with additional printed copies of her resume, a black notepad, and thank you cookies. Sitting at his dining table, McMahon looked at Miss Grant's resume and complimented her communication skills and common sense before discussing a little about their personal life. For example, Miss Grant told McMahon about her hardships that led to the resident manager's offer to help her, and described losing her parents and her family's bankruptcy. Other trauma that led her to seek financial independence. To ensure that she would never have let me put that in there again. Let me start over. For example, Miss Grant told McMahon about the hardships that led the resident manager's offer to help and described her losing her parents, her family bankruptcy, and other trauma that had led her to seek financial independence to ensure she would never experience losing her home again. Let me reset this camera. McMahon shared stories about his upbringing, his traumatic childhood, growing up in poverty, and current family dynamics, including his separation from Linda, described as his ex and long gone, as quote, his ex and quote, long gone. He added his marital status is an arrangement on paper for business purposes, and that he lives a quiet, isolated existence outside of WWE. At the end of the meeting, McMahon told Ms. Grant that he didn't just want to give her a job, but, quote, give her a life, end quote. And that he would find a place for her at WWE. A stunned Miss Grant said that she didn't know how to thank him for possibly just changing possibly just changing my life. McMahon responded that Stunned Miss Grant said that she didn't know how to thank him for possibly just changing my life. And McMahon responded that one simple quote, thank you, quote, is enough, and that he'd accept a hug. They stood and McMahon then told Miss Grant that he'd, quote, get the ball rolling on next steps, but it was a busy time of the year as the WWE was prepared for WrestleMania, explaining that it was WWE's, quote, Super Bowl. He then invited Miss Grant to attend as his guest alongside with the resident manager, and added that he would personally select their seats for them to have the best possible experience. McMahon advised her that his office would reach out to her and set up a meeting with a trusted official, WWE corporate officer number 2, at the WWE headquarters. After asking her cell was the best number to reach her on, McMahon shared his personal phone number with Miss Grant, walked her to the door, and again hugged her while whispering, quote, so good. McMahon arranges for Miss Grant to be hired by WWE while beginning to groom her for sexual exploitation. On March 31st, 2019, days before Miss Grant was scheduled to meet with the WWE corporate officer number 2, McMahon unexpectedly invited Miss Grant to come back to his condo for pointers for her meeting with corporate officer number 2. When she arrived, McMahon gave her a huge embrace and suggested they sit on the couch. It quickly became clear that McMahon had no intentions of giving her pointers for an interview except for a single direction. If the topic comes up during her meeting, Miss Grant could state they, quote, met through a mutual friend. During this meeting, McMahon described a surgery he had on his knee by touching Miss Grant's leg and drawing a line where the surgery had taken place with his finger. He stated, similar to rehabbing an injury, Miss Grant cannot let scar tissue build up inside of her from trauma, as her vulnerability is a, quote, gift. McMahon explained that there are people intimidating around him and are afraid to touch him. McMahon added that he is an affectionate person who likes to hug and starves physical attention. McMahon then led Miss Grant on a tour of his condo before hugging her goodbye, again whispering, feels so good. On April 1st, 2019, Miss Grant met with WWE corporate officer number 2 at WWE's headquarters for a short time. The WWE corporate officer number 2 hardly asked any questions, saying that WWE corporate officer number 2 was figuring out where Miss Grant would be placed, then promised to be in touch after WrestleMania. Later that day, Miss Grant texted McMahon enthusiastically, described her meeting with the corporate officer number 2. She also commented on the dinosaur skull she saw on Mr. McMahon's office wall, prompting her response by, quote, by the way, if you're a bad girl, and the BAD was all caps, the T-Rex will eat you with the letter U, not you. followed by, seriously, Janelle, whenever you and I land in the WWE, you will be a credit to the organization. Later, on April 7, 2019, Miss Grant and the resident manager were provided VIP experience at WrestleMania, including private transportation in a black SUV arranged by McMahon. Per McMahon's instructions, Miss Grant was diligently taking notes about her impressions. From WrestleMania, her first time attending such an event, Miss Grant was left overwhelmed, emotionally feeling hopeful that everything McMahon promised would become a. Over the next several weeks, McMahon invited Miss Grant to his condo on several occasions, each time assuring her that he would find the right position for her at WWE. For each meeting with McMahon, Miss Grant brought sample job descriptions she found online to review with him and demonstrate the type of roles she might. McMahon listened to Miss Grant, asked her questions, pointed out qualities, and described as a rare gift, including her, quote, goodness, vivaciousness, childlike innocence, and her ability to be, quote, vulnerable. All these things made her an easy target. McMahon also initiated long physical embraces with Miss Grant, reportedly telling her that he trusted her and that he could be himself around her, and how he'd open his home to her. During one visit to the condo in late April of 2019, McMahon did not greet Miss Grant when she entered, but instead called her into his master walk-in closet. As soon as she turned the corner, McMahon emerged from his bedroom wearing only briefs. Shocked, Miss Grant turned around and apologized. McMahon laughed and asked her to turn back. He then handed her a shirt and asked for help with the buttons. McMahon reminded her that he was working hard on her role and said he felt good about taking care of her. Around that time, McMahon also told Grant that he would never forget how helpless she looked when they first met, that he wanted to wrap his arms around her and assure her that, quote, everything's going to be okay, quote, and that Miss Grant's problems were in the past. McMahon also told Miss Grant that he'd interview her as a true friend. However, McMahon advised Grant that the people at WWE could never know about their closeness, or else rumors would spawn and threaten them, particularly due to Miss Grant's physical. McMahon also emphasized the circumstances could jeopardize the company. Around that time, he mentioned that he had an attorney on speed dial whom he described as the best of the best at making problems, including people who became problems, go away. On April 21st, 2019, McMahon unexpectedly invited Miss Grant to his condo to provide her with an update. Upon her arrival, McMahon assured Miss Grant that she was Upon her arrival, McMahon assured Miss Grant that he was a man of his word and that his office would be in touch with her as she turned to leave. McMahon grabbed a large black electric massager and told Miss Grant to turn around for a demonstration. He quickly moved to rubbing his hands on Miss Grant's upper back before reminding her that she would hear from his office about next steps in a day or two. 2 days later, Miss Grant was contacted about a further meeting at WWE. A week later, she met with two high-ranking members of Human Resources, referred to herein as Human Resource Employee Number 1 and Human Resource Employee Number 2, respectively. Both Human Resources Employees 1 and 2 provided Ms. Grant with their impressions about the company culture at WWE and confirmed that, quote, the ball was in their court to figure out where she would be the best fit in WWE. On May 5th, 2019, Ms. Grant visited the condo again, and the topic of bucket list came up, during which Ms. Grant expressed that she always dreamed of attending the Belmont Stakes. McMahon responded that he would personally acquire 2 tickets for her, which Ms. Grant said she could not. McMahon then stood up from his chair and knelt in front of the chair where Ms. Grant was seated, blocking her from standing. He leaned close to Ms. Grant and told her, kiss him. Miss Grant paused and gave McMahon a kiss on the cheek, to which McMahon said, "That's not what I meant." After McMahon walked off to his bedroom, he said that Miss Grant. After McMahon walked off to his bedroom and said that he wanted Miss Grant, she swiftly rejected his advances and tried to reason with him that he was putting her in a bad position. Miss Grant pled with McMahon to stop and think about what he's doing. McMahon then begged her repeatedly simply to hold Miss Grant out of fear for her employment and his earlier implied threats about his legal team dealing with problems. Miss Grant laid down on the bed next to McMahon and kept her hands clasped and her ankles crossed as she acquiesced in saying that he could hold her, but nothing more. Miss Grant tried to make small talk about WWE's TV storylines. McMahon suggested she watch the next episode of Monday Night Raw and text him before the broadcast. After she agreed, he forcibly kissed her and began pulling down the straps on her sweater. Miss Grant then sat up and said she needed to leave and had a lot to process and left. The next day, Miss Grant watched the show as promised and texted McMahon to wish him well. She was shocked when he appeared on the show and texted him back in the middle of the live broadcast. Quote, "That was a very nice message." It's a smile emoji. It made me smile. Double smile emoji. On May 9th, 2018, McMahon texted Miss Grant that she will have a job at WWE by that Friday. The next day, the Human Resources employee number 2 called Miss Grant to inform her that WWE corporate officer number 4 would contact her at 4 p.m. to discuss a legal role. After her call with WWE corporate officer, Miss Grant sent McMahon a thumbs-up text message to indicate the call went well. And around 7 p.m., corporate officer number 4 unexpectedly called her a second time and formally offered her a job, saying, "Welcome to the WWE." On May 11, 2019, McMahon invited Miss Grant to his condo again to ask her to lay in bed with him before informing her that he ordered WWE corporate officer number 4 to offer her the job. Even though a job description had not been firmed up beyond. Oh my gosh, sorry. On May 11, 2019, McMahon invited Miss Grant to his condo again to ask her to lay in the bed with him before informing her that he had ordered corporate officer number 4. While incredibly excited to finally receive the long-awaited employment and financial security, Miss Grant expressed to Mr. McMahon that there seemed to be a conflict between his doing this and his warning to Miss Grant that no one could know about their closeness. He appeared amused with this, replying, quote, "It's my company." McMahon then undressed down to his briefs while Miss Grant remained clothed. He began kissing Miss Grant, inserting his hand into her pants without consent. On May 16th, 2019, McMahon informed Miss Grant that he had obtained 2 tickets to the Belmont Stakes, scheduled June 8th, 2019. On May 17, 2019, Miss Grant received an offer from the WWE for an entry-level job as a, quote, legal administrations coordinator. A legal administrator coordinator. Yeah. With a salary of $75,000. On May 18, 2019, McMahon had summoned Miss Grant to his condo. She brought a printed copy of the offer letter to review with him. McMahon informed Miss Grant that her new boss, a WWE employee who worked in risk and governance relations, referred to herein as WWE employee number 1, was a decades-long family friend and confidant, similar in age to McMahon, and one of a small original group of what men called, quote, the Titan family, who helped the WWE expand from a regional promotion to a global juggernaut. As McMahon stated outside of his attorney, WWE employee number 1 was the most feared figure in the company because WWE employee number 1 usually fired employees. Beyond that, he offered little details about WWE's employee number one's role at WWE. Instead, he focused on WWE employee number one's personal traumas, explaining that similar to Miss Grant, WWE employee number one has no family left after WWE employee number one's spouse passed away, and that the McMahons and WWE were all WWE employee number one's surrogate family. McMahon touted WWE employee number one's loyalty, saying that WWE employee number one would protect Miss Grant, and then led her to the bedroom while giving her a command of please don't stop this. Miss Grant then led her to so the Vince led her to the bedroom saying, please don't stop this. During the May 2018 encounter, Miss Grant felt coerced, engaging sexual activity, and McMahon had trapped her in an impossible situation, as she feared adverse career and personal consequences and legal retaliation if she declined his advances. McMahon stated that this is what I've been waiting for, as he performed oral sex on Miss Grant. Miss Grant asked that protection be used. McMahon responded there was no need to worry because he was, quote, clean. Feeling that she was being used for his gratification, Miss Grant went numb and was unable to make eye contact. McMahon then flipped on his back and said, okay, jack him off. Disturbed by the non-consensual sexual encounter, she hoped that McMahon would cease his advances, but his advances continued and left her to fulfill his demands or lose her job. On June 16, 2019, days before with WWE, Miss Grant attempted to shut down any further physical contact or sexual encounters by admitting to McMahon her unhappiness and concern regarding her first ever job in his legal department, no less, while in a physical relationship with the company chairman and CEO. She requested they end any physical relationship while remaining friends to avoid risk for either of them. McMahon refused, saying that it was not an ending. It did not need to, and that he did not ever envision, quote, ever envisioning. He reminded her that he trusted her, reiterated that rumors would lead to trouble, probed whether her silence would be an issue, and brushed off her concerns that she was struggling with the feeling that her job was unearned. Vince McMahon told Miss Grant that all she needed to do was not tell anyone, and, quote, it just has to look legit. McMahon then spun the conversation and told Miss Grant to focus on the positives and embrace her life was about to change, saying, quote, isn't that what you've always wanted, end quote. McMahon manipulatively emphasized that she was about to start an adventure and gain new family in the WWE. As a surrogate for the family she had lost. McMahon then spun the conversation and told Miss Grant to focus on the positives. We already read that one. Ultimately, Miss Grant unsuccessfully attempted to end the future unwanted physical contact quickly through her physical contact. Quickly taught her her view on the matter was not relevant. Miss Grant's WWE career commences minimal work and an absent boss. On June 17, 2019, Miss Grant reported to the WWE headquarters for her first day of work, with attorneys in glass offices and support staffs in cubicles with low walls and tall monitors. It was easy to see how much other colleagues worked. It was a quiet and small department. It even was easy to overhear conversations. Ms. Grant was immediately surprised that there was not much work assigned to her, struggling to even appear busy in her new role. In stark contrast to colleagues who complained about overflowing inboxes, Ms. Grant's phone only overflowed with the controlling and sexually charged text messages from the chairman and CEO, reminding her of McMahon's power and ever-present surveillance. Colleagues shared onboarding stories with Ms. Grant and talked about receiving pre-made binders of information or the opportunity to shadow departing employees, none of which happened for Ms. Grant, nor did anyone know what her unusual title of administrator coordinator meant. Ms. Grant didn't even meet WWE employee number one until her second week. That was her boss, by the way. Back to the document. WWE employee number one was a lively individual who frequently regaled the legal department with stories of others at WWE. If McMahon's name was mentioned, WWE employee number one would turn to Miss Grant with a smile and a finger point and or comment that drew attention to her connecting to McMahon, such as, quote, "She knows what I'm talking about," end quote. WWE employee number one and Miss Grant bonded as quickly as McMahon had predicted. Miss Grant referred to him as partner, was taught words to live by in the WWE, including, quote, "We do what's in the best interest of the company. Protect the business," end quote. And if McMahon wants something, quote, "The answer isn't no, but rather how do we make it happen," end quote. WWE's employee number one also impressed on Mrs. Grant that job titles don't mean anything for members of Vince McMahon's inner circle, which she clearly was a part of. As WWE employee number one was seldom in office and required little administrative support, Ms. Grant reported indirectly to another WWE employee within the legal department, referred to here as WWE employee number two, who's provided her with occasional projects related to talent appearances and the XFL that helped fill Ms. Grant's time. Based on her hiring alone, WWE corporate officer number four was on notice that there was something different about Ms. Grant, namely her connection to McMahon, as Ms. Grant feared and had expressed to Ms. McMahon she was unhappy that the spotlight wasn't necessarily put on her before she even set foot in the office. Ms. Grant immediately noticed that corporate officer number four was warm with other colleagues but was cold towards her. Beginning in July 2019, Ms. Grant raised an issue related to XFL's performance-enhancing drug policy with McMahon. WWE corporate officer number four's behavior shifted from cold to actively hostile. If Miss Grant walked into the room while the WWE corporate officer number four was laughing with other colleagues, corporate officer number four's expression immediately became blank, and corporate officer number four would walk away. If WWE's corporate officer number four and Miss Grant walked towards each other in the hallway, corporate officer number four stopped and changed directions. Colleagues noticed that this shift in behavior, while some commented onto Miss Grant, others emulated it. Notwithstanding the issues detailed above, Ms. Grant took her employment seriously. In contrast, McMahon continued to pattern sending sexually charged messages throughout the work week. Certainly, her employment depended on her continual appeasement in obedience to McMahon. And believing she needed McMahon's protection from suspicious corporate officer number four and others, Ms. Grant felt no choice but to respond in kind. From all this, Ms. Grant began to experience debilitating panic attacks in the office on a near daily basis that left her physically drained. She could not hide the physical symptoms of these attacks and texted a resident manager, quote, "You should see the way people look at me when I'm having an attack," end quote. But while her co-workers noticed, no one dared to get involved. That's brutal. McMahon's coercive control tactics to sexualize and dehumanize Miss Grant. In the summer of 2019, McMahon's presence was all-consuming in Miss Grant's life. In the office, she felt monitored as she was surrounded by aliases of McMahon, which led her continued her daily panic attacks outside the office. McMahon sexualized her entirely. He no longer referred to her as a friend and largely stopped talking to Miss Grant outside of sexting and fantasy talk. Any non-sexual texts related to life and or work were either ignored or given token responses like quote okay or quote yep. Uh, as detailed here, McMahon was adamant about having Miss Grant send him explicit photographs, impressing upon her that it was part of her sexuality. Given the control that McMahon had over her, Miss Grant's employment, she felt compelled to comply and sent the explicit photographs to McMahon's mobile device. Miss Grant was routinely assured that the photographs she was providing to McMahon were to remain private and were part of their quote secret world. McMahon began to degrade Miss Grant, calling her quote his bitch end quote, while hinting at a fascination with having other people watch them engage in sexual activity. Additionally, this complaint details the encounter during which McMahon caused Miss Grant to sustain physical injury, including bleeding and pain from forceful use of sex toys, despite Miss Grant's plea to cease any further sexual activity. The number of sexual encounters increased, as did McMahon's physical aggression during them. Notably, McMahon was most aggressive when using certain sex toys named after male WWE superstars and wrestlers and performers. McMahon named the sex toys so the color of the toy matched the race of a wrestler. For example, a black dildo would be named after an African American wrestler, and a white dildo, quote dildo, would be named after a Caucasian wrestler. In addition to McMahon's infatuation with pretending that other men, and namely certain WWE talent, singular talent, were in the room with them. And yet this was another incremental step to desensitizing Miss Grant to his fantasies, eventually demands that she perform sexual acts for and or have sexual contact with others within WWE. During a David vs. Goliath type wrestling match in 2019, Miss Grant shared with McMahon her thoughts on the event. The draw of rooting for the underdog, the idea and ideas for future events. McMahon complimented her on her creative input. She believed that she was being taken seriously. That is, until McMahon named a dildo after the smaller wrestler and attempted to sexualize the situation, diminishing her input. By the fall of 2019, Vince McMahon pressed for pornographic videos and more explicit content. When Miss Grant expressed apprehension with his request, McMahon responded with assurances that she could trust him or questioned why she didn't trust him. McMahon also took care to remind Miss Grant of his power and influence, such as by flaunting meetings with the Saudi Crown Prince on October 2019. McMahon tightened his grip on Miss Grant and discredits her doctor, replacing him with one of McMahon's own choosing. In addition to her panic attacks, Miss Grant began experiencing increasing severe anxiety, mental and emotional symptoms, including sleep disruption, dizziness, exhaustion, rashes, weight loss, hair loss, and migraines. In November 2019, Miss Grant informed McMahon that her doctor suggests that her symptoms stemmed from trauma and ongoing stress. McMahon mocked her, quote, emotional trauma my ass, double exclamation point, end quote. However, on November 20th, 2019, McMahon insisted that Miss Grant see a physician of his choosing. This physician referred to her herein as celebrity doctor. And the facility that celebrity doctor operated from will be referred to here as alternative clinic. So we have a new person in here, celebrity doctor, and where they work at is alternative clinic. McMahon and celebrity doctor assured Grant that her bills at alternative clinic would be taken care of under McMahon's account. After the initial visit, it became apparent that Mr. McMahon's celebrity doctor wanted Miss Grant to remain in the care of celebrity doctor. Practiced Miss Grant felt pressure to do so. Celebrity Doctor made comments about how Celebrity Doctor, they referring to McMahon and Alternative Clinic, had saved her life. Celebrity Doctor often remarked how Miss Grant was unable to even make eye contact with Celebrity Doctor during their initial sessions, an obvious sign of trauma. Miss Grant acknowledged that having a relationship with McMahon during the visits with Celebrity Doctor, who gave a little reaction, save telling her what? Miss Grant acknowledged that having a relationship with McMahon during visits with Celebrity Doctor, who gave little reaction, save telling her there were many different paths to God and love. Celebrity Doctor lavished attention, treatments, and products on Miss Grant, all of which were paid under the McMahon's account. Miss Grant never provided with any receipt. When Miss Grant inquired about the certain treatment provided, Celebrity Doctor challenged her on whether she could trust Celebrity Doctor and postured that if she didn't trust Celebrity Doctor, then she would, quote, "We should part ways right now." At the outset of her care with Celebrity Doctor, each session lasted up to 1 hour. Miss Grant would leave feeling exhausted from Celebrity Doctor's deep dives into her personal and work life as a, quote, coach, end quote, focused on behavioral science. In 2020, McMahon's voices concern about rumors then publicly exploits her in Miss Grant's desperate attempts to leave WWE. In 2020, McMahon voices concerns about rumors, then publicly exploits her and Miss Grant's desperate attempts to leave WWE. On January 30th, 2020, WWE issued a press release announcing that the company's co-president, George Barrios, and Michelle Wilson were departing the company and would no longer serve on its board of directors. A significant drop in WWE stock price followed. The company announced that Frank Riddick III, a member of the board of directors for more than 11 years, would be interim chief financial officer and reported to McMahon. On February 3rd, 2020, McMahon sent a message to Miss Grant advising he had been informed by WWE corporate officer number 2 that there were a lot of rumors circulating about McMahon and Grant. McMahon warned Miss Grant that rumors were not good for either of them. Then on February 2010 of 2020, without any advance warning, Miss Grant was temporarily relocated to XFL's workforce. Miss Grant, having been desperate to escape the feeling of being trapped in her existence at WWE, applied to remain at the XFL on March 6, 2020. She openly vocalized her desire to remain with the XFL to colleagues, even referring to her state of work at the WWE as, quote, nothingness, end quote. She sought permission to make the change official from WWE employee number 1 and corporate officer number 4 before informing McMahon days after this, during which time she had finally told McMahon about her application to remain with the XFL. Her request was denied. In the weeks that followed, despite McMahon's warning about the rumors and directions that Miss Grant ordered her to play dumb, he began showing expletive photos of Miss Grant to both people inside and outside the company. On March 26, 2020, McMahon sent a lengthy message to Miss Grant describing in details the circumstances surrounding sharing explicit photographs of Miss Grant to a former WWE referee, here named WWE referee. McMahon described how WWE referee left to masturbate and told Miss Grant that she made a perfect stranger very happy. Miss Grant initially dismissed this as a mere fantasy talk, believing that McMahon would not actually do such a reckless thing. But when she voiced apprehension about McMahon sharing the naked photos of her with someone she did not know, McMahon's response was not to comfort her, but to assure of the WWE's referee's loyalty to him. Sharing of explicit photos terrified Miss Grant, as it illustrated McMahon's sheer lack of self-control and further panicked her that these private messages and intimate photos, including her face, would become shared with complete strangers. On March 30th, 2020, McMahon enthusiastically messaged Miss Grant that WWE referee had shown a friend the naked photo of Miss Grant, which marked the beginning of McMahon sharing Miss Grant's naked pictures with others who he encouraged them to share with their friends. On March 31st, 2020, Miss Grant expressed concerns to McMahon that she had no intention of having sex with these strangers and requested McMahon make the message clear, as she felt threatened and distressed by the responses her pictures were getting. She made it clear that she did not want to participate. She didn't want any perception of her moving beyond this point of mere fantasy. Shortly after, McMahon surprised Grant with news that he had protected her job from a furlough that WWE would imminently announce. The furlough affected a large number of employees, and McMahon emphasized that he personally made sure that she would not become one of them, reinforcing her dependency on him, particularly after a majority of the support staff in the legal department, all hired prior to Ms. Grant, were furloughed. McMahon became the most important figure in Miss Grant's life, as he meticulously asserted power and control over every aspect of it. Miss Grant's fears intensified over the consequences that could result in McMahon's actions, particularly by sharing her naked pictures. She became paranoid and completely dependent on a worshipfully devoted McMahon. He in turn passed forward, exerting his power over Miss Grant as he saw fit. McMahon recruits other men and forces Miss Grant into sex trafficking. In May 2020, McMahon had recruited an individual whom he manipulatively referred to as his friend to engage in a, quote, threesome with McMahon and Miss Grant, and the, quote, friend turned out to be McMahon's physical therapist at Alternative Clinic and is referred to herein as physical therapist. To introduce Miss Grant's participation into the threesome, McMahon began referring to Miss Grant as his girlfriend and sent her a large bouquet of flowers. Nevertheless, on May 8th, 2020, Miss Grant expressed apprehension about participating in the threesome. In response to McMahon, insisted that plans were already made and suggested that he would lose a friendship if she did not go through with it. On this day of the threesome, on May 9th, 2020, Miss Grant showed up to the condo, but reiterated she did not want to go through with the act. She expressed fear of being thrown around like a rag doll by McMahon and the physical therapist. After Miss Grant clearly stated she wanted to back out. After Miss Grant clearly stated she wanted to back out, McMahon responded by telling Miss Grant for the first time that he loved her, stunning her into silence. McMahon's manipulative tactic resulted in the outcome he wanted. He led her down the stairs to the bedroom, and the physical therapist was already waiting to begin the threesome. Early in the encounter, McMahon immediately directed Miss Grant to lay down on her back. In a supplicating position. I'm not sure what that is. While straddling over her, McMahon defecated on Miss Grant's head. McMahon left to shower off, but he insisted Miss Grant remain in place. With excrement in her hair, he continuing performing. Early in the encounter, McMahon immediately directed Miss Grant to lay down on her back in a supplicating position. While straddling over her, McMahon defecated on Miss Grant's head. McMahon left to shower off, but he instructed Miss Grant to remain in place with excrement in her hair and to continue performing for his friend. While Miss Grant requested protection, none was offered. McMahon, the physical therapist, actively continued with the threesome and directed Miss Grant to perform Miss Grant's sexual performance for around an hour and a half while she was left covered in feces. Following the threesome on May 11th, 2019, McMahon sent an explicit text message to Miss Grant that he further detailed his fantasies seeing her engaged in sexual relationships. I am not going to read the full text message. Well, maybe some of them are not things I'll read, but I'll read what I can for you, right? I understand this is a difficult situation and there's a lot of stuff going on, but yeah, these are text messages sent from Vince McMahon, allegedly sent from Vince McMahon to Miss Grant. Quote, "I love it. That's you, Janelle. You just can't get enough, can you? In the future, it's going to be so bad that you'll demand to be F twice in a day and not just with blank in a three-way. Why not let others see the beautiful, voluptuous body and watch you shake uncontrollably when you... They'll go out of their minds. Then they'll find more friends and we'll tie you up so you're helpless. I'll direct them to have their way with you the way they want. Who can make you scream the loudest? Maybe I'll just line them up and have them right in your mouth." That's a misspelling. "And all over your and at the same time. You'll be covered in and we'll make you eat it all and taste everybody's. The next morning, you'll be a little sore, but you're still going to want more." McMahon then pressured Miss Grant into several additional threesomes in a large part because she felt she had no other choice, particularly after McMahon's comments that he had personally ensured that she had not lost her job. Basically, Vince says, "You only kept your job because of me," so it kind of made her feel beholden, right? Her subsequent run-ins with a physical therapist at Alternative Clinic also served as a reminder how much was at stake if she did not obey. McMahon controlled Miss Grant's employment, her income, paid for her medical care, and circulated naked pictures of her and ignored her lack of consent for the first threesome. Indeed, in text conversations would begin to cross over from McMahon's fantasies into reality. Miss Grant often attempted to avoid the physical encounters with the physical therapist, as on September 23rd, 2020, she told McMahon that there was no room for a third body. After the threesome began, McMahon became more sadistic in his fantasies, focused on controls such as choking, sensory deprivation, pain, humiliation, group scenarios, which Miss Grant was physically overwhelmed and subservient. This is a text message from Vince McMahon, and allegedly from Vince McMahon, and I quote, I said, like I said, it's in response to your last picture. "You need your panties ripped off and 3 black in all your holes at the same time. Way up your as far as they'll go, but even further. And the thickest goes down your throat so it makes you gag, convulse as those big black pound away as it feels like from the start you're being assaulted, but it's just made you nonstop. Just one continuous, constant, and just before you pass out, those big black, as you lay on your stomach and the is coming out of all of your, then you'll turn over and Jesus Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. If you've made it to this point in this video, first of all, it's not been a fun one. But I have tried to not editorialize a lot here. I'm just trying to read as well as I can read it. This is crazy. This is insane. I'm gonna keep reading. I do think it's important for people to see this stuff, or at least hear it, because this is what's happening to an individual at a company that we all love and support. We love wrestling, and this is bad. I digress. Let me continue. On one occasion, he instructed Miss Grant, "Do not knock on the door, because if I see you, I will rape you in the hallway." End quote. To leave no doubt regarding the dynamic of their relationship, on May 12, 2020, McMahon texted Miss Grant, quote, "I'm the only one who owns you and controls you, who I want to F you," end quote. The theme that was often reiterated throughout their involvement. On June 17, 2020, Miss Grant sent text messages noting her 1-year anniversary joining WWE. McMahon ignored her. 1 month later, McMahon reminded Miss Grant about the far-reaching results of his texting out explicit content from her. "By now, thousands of men see you every day all over the world, and they all want to F you," end quote. At this time, McMahon openly shared explicit photographs and salacious stories about Miss Grant with the WWE crew at TV tapings. A group McMahon also referred to as her, quote, fan club. Indeed, McMahon exuberantly messaged her a, quote, truthful story, having just shared explicit content with a group of 12 men on the WWE tech crew and recounted obscene details that he shared with them. This is a text message from Vince McMahon. "I just passed my phone around to a bunch of techs on the crew. They were screaming, quote, OMG, quote, she's fucking beautiful. Look at that ass. I'd like to get that," end quote, from the tech crew in this text message. Text message from Vince McMahon continues, "I paused to count out loud how many guys there were. 12. Then I said, quote, okay, there's 12 of you. She would love to F each one of you and every one of you at one time. All," it says, "the guys cheered in brackets, but she will only do it if she takes 3 at a time." That brought out a huge reaction. "She wants one deep in her, one way down her, and one in her, and you can her until you..." She may scream and try to say no, although it would be difficult to say anything with a down her throat. Then I said, quote, listen, no. Maybe these are 2 different text messages. Oh, no, okay, it's just the screenshot's weird. Then I say, "Listen, no matter what, just pound away till you," end quote. More, the Vince McMahon text message continues, "Baby, these guys are having a blast with me. Some of them didn't believe me when I said you were the greatest F in the world, and no matter how much you get, you always wanted more. And then I said she loves, baby, all these techs, as we call them, are having the time of their lives listening to my truthful stories. I listened, then let me rephrase that there. After truthful stories, that I then said you would take a 10-minute break between each, but then you would get back on your hands and knees with your in the air and say, okay, I'm ready. Who's next? I drove the boys wild, or should I say you drove them wild. Just imagine if this really happened, baby, how much you would have coming out of all of your..." On the occasion when Miss Grant informed McMahon that she was physically injured during sexual encounters, McMahon's response varied from apologies to non-accountable pushback and blaming impulse control. When the encounters were particularly brutal, Miss Grant learned to book in the truth of her injuries with compliments to create the least amount of pushback from McMahon. However, Miss Grant sustained brutal and painful injuries, including bleeding, swelling, bruising. The spans of incontinence were resulting from Vince McMahon's forceful use of his fists, adult toys, and objects unsafe for vaginal insertion or penetration. For instance, on August 28, 2020, Miss Grant texted McMahon that she was injured during their latest sexual encounter. As a result, McMahon insisted on penetrating Miss Grant with an extra large sex toy, including a vibrating one that caused her to panic. McMahon ignored Miss Grant, warning that the device was not meant for insertion, and forcibly shoved the wand inside of her body so deeply it became stuck for a period. She texted she was in pain am bleeding a lot between last night and today. And she said, quote, I'm on the floor right now because I can't get comfortable, unquote. And on August 29th, 2020, she texted him an update saying, still really uncomfortable, and I got hurt in some way that I'm having trouble describing. McMahon did apologize, saying that, quote, sometimes I get carried away. McMahon recruits Laurinaitis into his exploitation of Miss Grant and transfers her into Laurinaitis' department of the WWE Trafficking and Sex Acts at WWE headquarters. During this time, Miss Grant became so sick from the stress and situations and of the situation that McMahon had subjected her to that her weight plummeted to just over 100 pounds, which McMahon ignored. One distressing event that occurred on November 21st, 2020 is when McMahon drove Miss Grant to WWE headquarters to fulfill his fantasy of having a sexual encounter with her in his office, causing Miss Grant to suffer a panic attack in the passenger seat while pleading with McMahon to change his mind and drive her back home. McMahon scoffed and then gave her an ultimatum: either have a sexual encounter in his office or inside the parked car. Terrified, Miss Grant obeyed McMahon's directions, and they entered the WWE headquarters for an encounter. Despite Miss Grant repeated statements that she did not consent to the threesome with McMahon and physical therapist, McMahon advertised her to others and told her that he had found another person to join them, defendant John Laurinaitis. In November 2020, McMahon pressed Miss Grant to make explicit photos and videos to send to Laurinaitis. McMahon orchestrated the exchange by instructing Miss Grant when to create explicit content for Laurinaitis, including what to say and to provide her with notes to adjust her performance. He was giving her fucking notes while he was assaulting her. That's just like an editorialization. Like, this dude was giving her notes on what she could say that, like, oh, God. McMahon then facilitated the exchange of explicit content back and forth between Miss Grant and Laurinaitis, notably. Even once phone numbers were exchanged between Miss Grant and Laurinaitis, McMahon insisted that he be privy to any message Miss Grant sent to Laurinaitis and demanded that she report back to him about all interactions, further illustrating the control level he had over Miss Grant. On or about December 29, 2020, a threesome was arranged between McMahon, Laurinaitis, and Miss Grant at McMahon's condo. McMahon instructed her to tell Laurinaitis that she was a neighbor and girlfriend working in the legal field, but not at WWE. Shortly after meeting Laurinaitis, Miss Grant asked him if she was the first woman who McMahon had introduced him to in such a setting. Laurinaitis failed to respond and shot a look directly at McMahon, who quickly intervened by kissing Miss Grant, initiating the sexual encounter among the three of them. Once again, Miss Grant asked for protection. Once again, her request was denied after assurances that Laurinaitis was, quote, clean. In the days that followed, McMahon texted her that Laurinaitis hugged me like a bear and said thank you to me about 12 times today. Well, that's hug me like a bear, but sorry. In contrast, Laurinaitis messaged Miss Grant, thank you for the fun afternoon. Around January 25th, 2021, Miss Grant was resigned to directly support WWE's new hire, a high-ranking employee in the legal department. On February 5th, 2021, McMahon sent Miss Grant to establish a schedule for when other men, including physical therapists and Laurinaitis, could have sex with Miss Grant, which Miss Grant attempted to rebuff. Vince McMahon message, exactly, baby, he's not the only one. Blank called me this afternoon begging to, and with his, okay. Miss Grant responded, give me another, allegedly, these are all alleged, obviously text messages in this sense, but you know what I mean. Give me another week, baby, and I'll be ready. I'm feeling more like myself. It's not great, but it's getting better. Tell him soon. I've already told him, baby. By the way, Johnny wants Tuesday, but this is coming this one coming an occasional Saturday, but maybe I can shift it to Thursday night. Johnny would like all of the above. Text like this shift schedule caused Miss Grant to suffer breakdowns over how her original hopes for a new life had been reduced to an objectification, dehumanized existence with no way out. On or about March 6, 2021, a second threesome between McMahon, Laurinaitis, and Grant occurred in March 2021. WWE had still not hired a replacement after WWE corporate officer number 4's termination in November 2020. On March 4, 2021, McMahon informed Ms. Grant, still entry-level coordinator, that his top executive in the company knew about their relationship and her presence in the legal department was effectively delaying the company's efforts to hire a new replacement for this high-ranking official, reinforcing the fact that many within the company were well aware of the circumstances detailed herein. As a result, McMahon stated that the plan was for her to change departments and verbally directed Ms. Grant to transfer to the Talent Relations Department, reporting to Laurinaitis. On March 10th, 2021, Ms. Grant sent McMahon a text message recapping their conversations, expressing shock and a range of concerns, including about Laurinaitis. Essentially, Ms. Grant expressed desire to be treated humanely and taken seriously, which she acknowledges could be, quote, an uphill battle. Ms. Grant's transfer to the Talent Relations Department came with expectations from both McMahon and Laurinaitis that she engaged with Laurinaitis sexually, both physically and with explicit content. On March 10, 2021, the WWE's corporate officer number 2 informed Grant that day that she would officially be moved to Talent Relations, and this would quickly begin reporting to Laurinaitis through. Although details about her role, including her title and salary, were still being firmed up, in essence, Miss Grant again found herself in a completely undefined role, except for the understanding that she remains a sexual slave to be used and trafficked by McMahon within WWE. On March 12, 2021, McMahon reminded her of the connection between her job and her role as a sexual object. Quote, let's work hard and play, all caps, hard too. 3 exclamation points, end quote. March 16, 2021, Miss Grant was directed to pick up a key to Laurinaitis' hotel room and serve herself to him as, quote, breakfast before the start of work. McMahon constantly enforced the expectation that Miss Grant sexually performed for him and her new boss, Laurinaitis, both in and out of the office. McMahon wrote on March 21st, 2021, do you promise to make me proud, baby? Will you show him what a porn star you can be? Will you show off for me like never before? On days when he's in town, I want him to F you every morning and later in the office too. End quote. McMahon also indicated on April 2nd, 2021 that Miss Grant should obey Laurinaitis should obey if Laurinaitis wanted to bring in more men. A quote from a alleged text from Vince McMahon. Maybe he wants 2 other guys to join in with him. Holy shit. If you've told him to do, quote, anything with him, so if he surprised you with 2 other, you would have no alternative other to take them on. OMG, the stories you could tell me. It makes me want to right now. By the way, I just thought of what might make an excellent idea. Maybe you can hint that he knows something who can be discreet. It might be better if you and Johnny try him out first so he can get more comfortable before he's introduced to me. Actually, that makes total sense, doesn't it? In text message. In April 21, WWE Senior Vice President of Human Resources was fired. The same month, McMahon was informed that Miss Grant, that she would be given the title of Vice President Operations within Talent Relations Department. However, days later, McMahon backtracked and said she would be a Director of Operations, said to avoid any suspicion of a sudden promotion to Vice President. During the conversation, McMahon told Miss Grant that he had expressed to other WWE management that he wanted to reach a level of Vice President, spend a year or 2 in that position, and she would be able to take, quote, take the experience anywhere, end quote. Ms. Grant left this conversation with McMahon hoping that she could escape this situation with her finances and reputation intact. She needed to survive until that point. In April 2021, a meeting between Ms. Grant and WWE Corporate Officer Number 2. Corporate Officer Number 2 acknowledges that the jump initially proposed from Vince to Vice President was too big and could put a target on Ms. Grant's back. So editorialization here, it seems like Corporate Officer Number 2 was aware and he was trying to, I guess, deflect heat here and say like, oh, well, if you move her there, people start asking questions and look into her maybe, so don't do that. Yikes. Nevertheless, back into the editorialization there. Nevertheless, WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 presented Ms. Grant with paperwork detailing the base salary increased to $200,000 as Director of Operations. As soon as Ms. Grant began work directly for Laurinaitis, forcibly touching and overtly sexual behavior became a part of daily life when he was in the office. On numerous occasions, Ms. Grant was directed to visit John Laurinaitis' hotel room before work to serve herself to him as, quote, breakfast. These devastating experiences made Ms. Grant feel as though she was being pimped out as an object for sexual gratification for her new boss. Upon information and belief, corporate funds from the WWE were used to finance Laurinaitis' hotel stays, which these coerced sexual encounters occurred. Per McMahon's instructions, Ms. Grant reported interactions with Laurinaitis back to McMahon, for whom the story served as a source of arousal. The arrangement with Laurinaitis left Ms. Grant miserable and enraged. However, in her years of experience with McMahon, she knew the request to stop would be ignored at best or used to destroy her career and reputation at worst. Ms. Grant was further left feeling isolated by colleagues and surveilled by top-level employees with WWE. Professionally and personally, Ms. Grant's fate was entirely in the hands of Vince McMahon, Laurinaitis, and the other WWE executives who enabled her abuse. On May 24, 2021, McMahon messaged Ms. Grant to remind her that a mistake could destroy her career and that she could pursue verbal communication rather than written where possible. Here's a printout of a message allegedly sent by Vince. Vince McMahon message allegedly, those compliments will keep on coming, baby. Just wait and see. I totally understand and agree. Being scared about communication and photos. Johnny gets drunk and sloppy and could easily make a mistake. That could cost him his job and yours too. Verbal communication is the way to go. That said, have you and Johnny talked about breakfast tomorrow? Response from Miss Grant, allegedly. We haven't discussed it at all. It's up in the air. Johnny complained about getting a new phone and it just arrived. I haven't set up a time to coordinate setting it up with IT because I need him to assure me that he's erased everything that he's ever saved. I truly regret that he ever got pics. It's not worth the stressing I'm feeling. I'm done with it. Panic that someone else's mistake could cost Miss Grant her livelihood left her feeling helpless and afraid for what would happen if McMahon's mood shifted, leading her to message him expressions of loyalty, love, and submission as a coping mechanism, and with the hopes he would protect her. On June 14, 2021, Ms. Grant told McMahon that she did not want to engage in sexual encounters with Laurinaitis, adding, I've left the hotel feeling bad about myself every time, end quote. McMahon responded that the one-on-one encounters could cease, but he expected threesomes with Laurinaitis to continue. McMahon and Laurinaitis confined Miss Grant to an office for an abusive sexual assault at WWE headquarters. Following the morning of June 15, 2021, approximately at 7:51 a.m., Miss Grant messaged McMahon that due to her work on an important project, she did not want a threesome that week as, quote, threesome won't set me up for success, it'll knock me out, end quote. To avoid pushback from McMahon, Miss Grant offered the following week instead. McMahon and Laurinaitis ignored her plea and brought her into Laurinaitis' office, forcibly touching and undressing her before forcing her to engage in a threesome on a conference table. Miss Grant pleaded no, quote, no, and, quote, please stop. McMahon responded with, quote, no means yes, end quote. Miss Grant again told them to stop, and instead of McMahon licked his finger and penetrated Miss Grant and said, quote, take it, bitch, end quote. With each taking turns and restraining her for the other, Laurinaitis then joined by forcibly shoving his tongue and then penis into Miss Grant's mouth. On June 23rd, 2021, around 11:21 a.m., McMahon directed Miss Grant in the middle of the workday to meet him on a lower floor. When Miss Grant arrived, McMahon led her inside his private locker room, locked the door, and forced himself on her over a massage table. Later that day, a $15,000 gift card to Bloomingdale's was purchased at McMahon's directive and delivered by McMahon's personal assistant to Miss Grant in her office. On multiple other occasions while Miss Grant worked under Laurinaitis, including after McMahon's promise that one-on-one encounters would end, even after his wife moved across the country to join Laurinaitis, he would call Miss Grant to his office, lock the door, unzip his pants, and instruct Miss Grant to perform oral sex. Through all of this, Miss Grant noticed that less she sexually engaged with Laurinaitis, the less work she had, as Laurinaitis began to belittle Miss Grant in front of colleagues. Fearing for herself and her future, Miss Grant asked Laurinaitis whether he still supported her promotion to vice president. He deflected with an answer about considering all the options and changed the topic. The extreme uncertainty and fear of her exacerbated Miss Grant's physical symptoms of her illness, including gastrointestinal issues, vomiting, which continued to worsen over the remainder of her time at WWE. McMahon used Miss Grant as a sexual pawn to entice world-famous wrestling talent to keep WWE superstars under contract with WWE. McMahon used Grant as a sexual pawn to entice world-famous wrestling talent to keep WWE superstar under contract with WWE. WWE superstar is a famous worldwide as a top talent within WWE superstar is a famous worldwide as a top talent with WWE, with a large collective fan base that helps generate viewership and drives in-person attendance, all of which enriches WWE and Vince McMahon. Upon information and belief, McMahon began to recruit WWE superstar for a sexual encounter with Miss Grant while she was still a coordinator in the legal department. By July of 2021, McMahon informed Miss Grant that WWE superstar would be their next, quote, playmate, end quote. As in other instances, McMahon described his fantasy of seeing Miss Grant engaged in unmerciful sexual acts with the WWE superstar, during which he would, quote, rip her open. McMahon also confided to Miss Grant that he wanted to have WWE superstar under a new contract, while WWE superstar indicated an interest in returning to other professional endeavors. On or about July 12, 2021, McMahon directed Miss Grant to create a personalized sexual content for WWE superstar. McMahon shared the photos with WWE and then informed Miss Grant, quote, he likes what he sees. On July 21 of 21, McMahon flew and or caused WWE superstar to fly on a jet into a local airport and travel to Connecticut across state lines, for which McMahon described as Miss Grant as a, quote, business dinner, end quote, as well as a sexual encounter with Miss Grant in Vince McMahon's condo. Upon information and belief The dinner was to discuss WWE superstar continued involvement with WWE. Prior to the quote business dinner, end quote, with Vince McMahon, WWE superstar made a brief visit to Miss Grant's building. However, WWE superstar did not return to the building for a sexual encounter because he was too intoxicated and had to be taken back to the plane. Later that evening, after McMahon recounted the story about his dinner with WWE superstar to Miss Grant, he sought to salvage the night and request that they quote role play a sexual encounter in which McMahon acted if he were the WWE superstar. McMahon was so physically rough with Miss Grant that during the encounter, Miss Grant begged McMahon to stop numerous times, including loud cries of "Help! I'm serious and I'm scared." As he, among other things, penetrated her, fisted her, pulled her hair, pinned her down, shoved her, and open palm slapped her. McMahon's assault caused Miss Grant to break down weeping and curl into the fetal position with her arms pulled up to protect her face. McMahon alternated between slaps and shoves before admitting, quote, "I'm really fucking you up with the right and the left tonight, huh?" End quote. McMahon forbade Miss Grant from leaving his condo that night unless he could verbally assure him that there wasn't a problem and everything was okay between them. Notably, however, he made no effort to check on her well-being after she left his condo. August 26, 2021, WWE held its second biggest annual event, SummerSlam in Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium. Around this time, McMahon and WWE superstar privately reached an informal agreement about his return. That night, McMahon texted Miss Grant a reminder that she was unenslaved object to him. Quote, I want to drive you lower and lower, so low you might beg me to sell you." McMahon continued to advertise her sexual encounters with Miss Grant to WWE superstar during the formal negotiations of a new booking contract with WWE. Vince McMahon alleged text screenshot here. Here's what Blank said after I told him that part of the deal where he's effing you. LOL, he said, quote, LOL, that's your turf. She'll be ruined after me and leave your ass. Plus, after me, your won't fit anymore. End quote. In December 21, McMahon gave Miss Grant a personal cell phone number to the WWE superstar and promised she'll do anything requested of her. In the days that followed, WWE superstar revealed a fetish to Miss Grant and tested McMahon's promise that Miss Grant would do, quote, anything, with a request that she send a video of herself urinating. Unable to recognize herself, Miss Grant was numb and obeyed. The WWE superstar informed Miss Grant that if she did not comply with the request, WWE superstar would have lost any interest in her and called her a, quote, bitch. That same month, WWE superstar expressed to Miss Grant his desires to set a play date, end quote, and have a sexual encounter. However, a snowstorm changed WWE superstar's travel plans, and Miss Grant ultimately used the weather and COVID-19 as an excuse and backed out. McMahon tells Grant that his wife has learned about her and pressured Miss Grant into an NDA. January 2022, McMahon abruptly distanced himself from Miss Grant, saying that he could not speak to her or be in the same room as her. On January 9th, 2021, Vince agreed to speak with Miss Grant at his condo. During this meeting, McMahon told Grant that his wife, Linda McMahon, had learned about their relationship with Miss Grant and that he was losing his condo and that she would divorce him. He added, too, that this public divorce would make Miss Grant a headline. Purportedly to salvage his marriage and avoid both negative publication and other repercussions of a divorce, McMahon wanted to ensure that Miss Grant would remain silent about his personal misconduct in order to preserve his controlling interest in the WWE. McMahon told Grant that if she left the WWE and signed an NDA, he was confident that Linda would not divorce him. He would remain in the condo and Miss Grant could avoid reputational harm. McMahon instructed Miss Grant that she should not go back to the office and immediately lessen her involvement on open work items. Miss Grant expressed concern about both her name being mentioned in the media and loss of control over her image, especially as McMahon had shared content of her for close to 2 years. The ramifications for her career. Vince McMahon struggled to suggest that he would attempt to help Miss Grant's reputation, keep her reputation intact, and that he or WWE's corporate officer number one would personally help Miss Grant find another job. McMahon also instructed Miss Grant not to share this news with anyone, suggested that she offer health-related excuse if asked why she's leaving WWE. Regarding the NDA, Miss Grant asked McMahon, is this when Jerry sends the paper? Quote, is this when Jerry sends the papers? End quote. McMahon nodded and assured Miss Grant that they would be, quote, in the driver's seat, end quote, to iron out terms together, that she would need an attorney to make things official and approved. Miss Grant asking Celebrity Doctor for an attorney referral. So she was going to ask, editorialization here, it seems like she was going to ask the Celebrity Doctor for an attorney referral. There is a line here in 207 that does mention Jerry, and I don't know if that's long time. I assume, right? I assume, but I could be completely wrong here. This might be Jerry McDivitt, which is like long-term Vince lawyer. I don't know if he was retired now. I know he retired at some time, like in these years, but I'm not sure if this was him. End of editorialization there. Following this discussion, McMahon led Miss Grant to his bedroom for another sexual encounter on January 14th, 22. McMahon sent Miss Grant a to-do list for the purposes of effectuating the NDA, as such retaining court or counsel, and also, let's read that again. On January 14th, 22, McMahon sent Miss Grant a to-do list for purposes of the NDA, such as retaining legal counsel, also including an offer for a one-on-one career coach. McMahon suggested that the list had been drafted by WWE corporate officer number 2. Before Miss Grant retained legal counsel, McMahon discussed the amount of money that would exchange for the NDA and settle on the lump sum of $3 million after Miss Grant told McMahon his initial offer of $1 million was not enough to compensate for her loss of earnings and potential, and the fact that she would be unable to continue her promised career trajectory of vice president, as well as failing to last as director for a full year. Before Miss Grant retained legal counsel, McMahon called Miss Grant with an update and informed her that Miss Grant's attorney and counsel for the WWE insisted on installing payments due to, quote, cash flow purposes, end quote. When Miss Grant responded that this reaction did not make sense for a billionaire, McMahon insisted it wasn't his idea. On or about January 1922, Miss Grant advised McMahon that she had contacted Celebrity Doctor about an attorney referral on a physician's recommendation. Upon McMahon's approval, she signed the retainer agreement with the attorney later that day. On January 24, 22, McMahon continued to engage in sexual text messages exchanged with Miss Grant, including encouraging her to send explicit photos to WWE Superstar. McMahon also requested that Miss Grant send him content she had sent to WWE Superstar. The quote negotiations of the NDA were brief, lasting only 8 days. Miss Grant reminded McMahon that the NDA ought to address people who knew their relationship, including not limited to Corporate Officer 1, Corporate Officer 2, John Laurinaitis, McMahon's personal assistant. Miss Grant and her attorney sought to incorporate the list of individuals who knew about the relationship into a Schedule A of the NDA. Miss Grant requested revisions were flatly rejected by McMahon, who reverted to their original draft rather than incorporate any of her proposed changes, with the exception as of the date of execution. Miss Grant would not speak on the relationship. On or around January 26, McMahon articulated an even more pressing need to get the NDA signed immediately, informing Miss Grant that under a tight deadline report pending the threatened legal action to the WWE Board of Directors, specifically the Audit Committee, and the McMahon and his attorneys could not do so unless Miss Grant signed the NDA. He informed Miss Grant that the board members were concerned about the delay. Furthermore, McMahon repeatedly pressed Miss Grant to stop her attorney from further, quote, wordsmithing, and blamed Grant's attorney for not understanding the urgency of the situation. Also, despite previous appeals, McMahon has now expressed that both he and the attorney had concerns about Miss Grant and warned her that her counsel would not be trusted, which in turn Miss Grant questioned her trust in personal attorney. On or around January 26, 2022, Miss Grant became so overwhelmed that she simply gave notice without the need for payment, even offering to sign a napkin or post-it note as a sign of goodwill. McMahon flatly rejected the desire to back out. On January 22nd, 2022, just 8 days after Miss Grant hired an attorney, McMahon left Miss Grant a lengthy audio message explaining why he needed to go through with it. This is all about the NDA. The negotiations. Hold on, where are we at? Hi, baby.
Hi. Am I on the camera?
No. Well, I mean, you're not on the camera. Yeah. I'm not live streaming or anything.
Okay. Did I interrupt?
No, you're good. I'll just cut it.
Do you want to eat tea for dinner?
I would reckon that I'm probably about 25 minutes from being done.
25 minutes?
Yeah.
And then what?
Then I'll go to Sarong and pick up dinner.
Can we just eat there?
What? If you want to, sure. All right, we'll go there then. Furthermore, McMahon repeatedly pressed Grant into... Wait, it's just a good board of directors. Yeah, okay. Furthermore, McMahon reportedly pressed Grant to stop her attorney from future wordsmithing and blamed Grant. We read that already. McMahon... Okay, we're here. All right, hold on. Let's start back up here. On January 18, 2022, just 8 days after Miss Grant had hired an attorney, McMahon left Miss Grant a lengthy message explaining why she needed to go through with it. The NDA pushing her to hurry up and sign the NDA, advising that she would be, quote, double effed, end quote, if she did not, presumably referring to both his divorce and reports to the board of directors. Between January 27th and 22, January 28th and 20, between January 27th and January 28th of 22, there were unresolved edits that led to a panicked phone call, including an attorney confidentiality clause in signatory line that Miss Grant's counsel said he would never sign. Also, the deadline to sign the NDA was pushed from January 31st to January 28th. McMahon continued pursuing Miss Grant with phone call or pressuring. McMahon continued pressuring Miss Grant with phone calls during which he pleaded, demanded, threatened, and begged her to sign the NDA, and reminded her that by not signing, she would jeopardize him, the company, his family, and that she would surely become the object of national headlines and ruin her reputation if she did not sign the NDA by the start of the WWE's live programming schedule on January 28th. He reassured her that nothing would change between them, and she would emerge with her reputation intact if she would only simply sign the NDA. Okay. In the state of mental defeat and fear from McMahon's threats, Miss Grant succumbed to his unrelenting legal pressure and signed the NDA just before the deadline of January 28 of 22. On February 4th of 22, Miss Grant was wired $1 million as the first installment of the NDA. On February 28th, 22, Miss Grant was wired $10,000 to cover her attorney's fees incurring in connections with the NDA. Both wires were sent. Originator described as Vincent K. McMahon, C/O WWF, and the original address is 1241 East Main Street, Stamford, Connecticut, United States. On February 9th and 10th, Miss Grant gave notice to Laurinaitis and put human resources at the WWE on official notice that she was leaving the WWE. After signing the NDA, Miss Grant was continued to ask about who had told Linda McMahon, as she was concerned about the ability to obtain employment in the future. McMahon responded that it did not matter and she was tired of her questions. After the NDA was signed, McMahon, wearing only a white robe, met Miss Grant at his condo to review outstanding business items. As Miss Grant proceeded to go to the door to leave, McMahon grabbed her arm before she exited, commanding her to do, quote, one last thing, and, quote, get on your knees. As Miss Grant knelt on the floor, barely a few feet away from the front door, McMahon opened his robe and ordered her, quote, eat him. McMahon grabbed the back of Miss Grant's head and slammed her face into his crotch a couple times until she gagged, pushing him away, telling him to stop, that she couldn't breathe. McMahon bonded that she wouldn't get away that easily and held her head as she forced himself back into her mouth, and she had no air. Miss Grant tried to push him away, but her head firmly placed and loudly commanded her look up, followed by Vince's demands of "take it, bitch." They momentarily made eye contact. McMahon force caused Miss Grant's body to convulse and retch while tears streaming down her face. McMahon then released his hold, closed his robe as she stood up after leaving. Miss Grant never saw Mr. McMahon again. On a March 2nd trip to on 22, Miss Grant was away on a trip to Florida. McMahon called Miss Grant to advise that he would probably be the last time she would ever hear from him. If she needed anything, to contact WWE Corporate Officer number 1 or Corporate Officer number 2. Over the course of approximately a half an hour phone call, McMahon lamented about his inability to focus on the upcoming WrestleMania and how his personal life had blown up over the past few weeks. Towards the end of the conversation, McMahon and Miss Grant agreed to resume contact after WrestleMania. He also instructed Miss Grant to continue having sexual relations with other men, including WWE superstar in the meantime. On March 4th of 2022, WWE superstar messaged Miss Grant that he was in New York. In line with Vince McMahon's order, Miss Grant texted WWE superstar explicit pictures. On March 7th, 2022, WWE superstar reached out to Miss Grant again. Miss Grant interpreted these back-to-back advances as an indication of McMahon's continued control. On March 30th, 2022, Miss Grant counsel received a call from McMahon's attorney advising that there had been an anonymous email about the relationship of Miss Grant and McMahon and Laurinaitis. Later in June and July of 22, stories were published regarding the matters of McMahon's multiple NDAs with various women associated with WWE's and the others. Miss Grant did not receive another payment under her NDA in February of 2023. Further, despite assurances from McMahon that he would cover her medical care and the costs associated with her tax liability for the $1 million payment, McMahon has refused to cover the cost. McMahon continues to pay for Miss Grant's medical care up until April 15, 2022, when he abruptly canceled it. These are the gifts given to the plaintiff during the time association with McMahon. From 2019 to 2022, McMahon provided Grant with gifts to keep her under McMahon's control. Upon information and belief, these gifts were provided to Miss Grant to include one purchased by McMahon and expensed them to the WWE. Examples of these items received by Miss Grant from McMahon include the following: alternative clinic medical care and medical and cosmetic services and products, clubhouse access and tickets to the Belmont Stakes, WrestleMania private full-day transportation premium tickets, a $2,000 Nordstrom's gift card, and a, quote, massive box of Godiva, which is a chocolate company. Examples of the items she received from Vince McMahon in 2020 include the following: $20,000 towards surgery paid directly to surgeon's office, pearl, diamond, pave, lariat necklace from Better Ridge in Greenwich, Connecticut. I think that's a necklace, I guess. Yeah. Blue cashmere knee-length cardigan from Nordstrom, blue Burberry check cashmere scarf from Nordstrom's, a blue cashmere and fur hat from Nordstrom's, gray cashmere shawl, Celine sunglasses, both of those were from Nordstrom as well, cable knit throw blanket, not listed where it's from, and a large bouquet of flowers delivered approximately every other week. Examples of the gifts that Miss Grant received from McMahon in 2021 include a 2022 BMW 430xi, a $5,000 gift card to a spa, 2 private chef-catered dinners in McMahon's condo, gold and diamond pave paperclip necklace from Better Ridge in Greenwich, Connecticut, $15,000 Bloomingdale's card, food assortment display, and antique tea ceremony set from Saudi Arabia, and a large bouquet of flowers delivered approximately every other week. Miss Grant was a subordinate and vulnerable victim to a predator, not consenting and a willing participant. Miss Grant was groomed and coerced by McMahon and Laurinaitis, and the WWE stood by and facilitated efforts to keep Miss Grant employed by the WWE to ensure McMahon continued sexual exploitation. In addition to what Miss Grant and her medical providers who examined her following the abuse will testify to, there is ample evidence Miss Grant's mental state and her attempts to avoid the unfortunate circumstances she found herself in. In January of 21, Miss Grant sent a message to resident manager stating that she was miserable at WWE. Quote, I don't say it to Vince, but as grateful as I am for my job and my salary, I'm actually miserable. Mismanaged all the time, and they admit they don't know what to do with me. Nobody gave a F when I was harassed, retaliated against to the point my reputation questioned and my work was taken away. As further allegations throughout the complaint, Miss Grant was frequently referred to as McMahon's quote bitch end quote on multiple occasions. Miss Grant objected to the treatment as allegations herein. Miss Grant before was being routinely directed by McMahon to engage in sexual contact with other men. Miss Grant had expressed her apprehension about McMahon's fantasy texts manifesting and graduating into reality. At near all relevant times, Miss Grant was employed of the WWE and could reasonably expect, at minimum, to lose her position if she did not comply with these wishes of McMahon. McMahon controlled WWE during Miss Grant's employment, and the company knew but did nothing about McMahon's exploitation of Miss Grant. As detailed here within, WWE knew of McMahon's illegal conduct and did nothing to stop it. This is self-evident from the numerous executives and board members who were privy to McMahon's involvement with Miss Grant, as well as prior indicates involvement of sexual misconduct. For instance, in or around March 21, Miss Grant introduced herself to WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 when they passed another in the hallway. WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 responded by telling Miss Grant that WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 knew exactly who she was. Corporate Officer Number 1 maintained an office suite on the executive fourth of WWE's company headquarters on 1241 East Main Street. Meanwhile, Miss Grant's cubicle in the company's legal department was in a different building across the street from the corporate headquarters. Corporate Officer Number 1, Miss Grant had no physical presence in 1241 until the beginning of February of 21, when she began to report to another attorney who kept offices in both buildings. Given that WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 is a very high-ranking WWE official, Miss Grant was an entry-level coordinator in the legal department. It was unusual that WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 would know who Miss Grant was at all at that point, except WWE Corporate Officer knew Miss Grant, at least in part, hearing about the ongoing exploitations of Miss Grant by McMahon. Following Miss Grant's message to McMahon on March 9th, 21, McMahon summoned Miss Grant to his condo that evening for a conversation during which McMahon confirmed WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 indeed knew exactly who she was, as Mr. McMahon had privately met with Corporate Officer Number 1 and Corporate Officer Number 2, and advised these individuals McMahon's connection. McMahon continued this conversation by detailing Miss Grant that she had expressed concerns, but they were ultimately unsupportive. McMahon also advised Miss Grant that one or both of WWE's corporate officers, Number 1 and Corporate Officer Number 2, inquired whether Miss Grant could be trusted, and that McMahon offered assurances that Miss Grant would not do something to hurt the WWE. Oh my God! Knowledge the part of the WWE's future illustrated by the multiple meetings Miss Grant had about initially hiring the subsequent request changes, including a number of such as meetings with Corporate Officer Number 2 and a voice memo McMahon sent Miss Grant following the morning of March 10th, mentioning the names of both Officers 1 and Corporate Officer 1 and 2 in connection. It's unusual for the executive chairman and the CEO to name drop two of the company's highest ranking officers in connection with a coordinator's first job promotion, especially as there's human resources partners assigned to that department. WWE Corporate Officer was a high-ranking legal department at WWE until November 2022. Upon the information, believed WWE corporate officer was terminated or asked to resign. Corporate officer 4 expressed to Miss Grant. Vince McMahon expressed to Miss Grant that corporate officer 4, while still employed at WWE, knew highly suspected a sexual relation between McMahon and Grant. Upon informing the belief, corporate officer number 4 articulated corporate officer number 4's knowledge and suspicion, at least one other executive. Knowledge on the part of WWE is still further illustrated by the fact that Miss Grant's presence became more visible over time, including during executive committee meetings, which were attended by individuals who had either direct knowledge of Vince McMahon's sexual exploitations of Miss Grant or were otherwise suspicious. Given Miss lengthy employment and job title, it was an abnormal sign of difference and special treatment for her to attend such meetings, especially when the executive's head of department, Laurinaitis, was in attendance as well. Notably, Miss Grant inquired with both WWE corporate officers 1 and 2 whether it was appropriate to attend these meetings. Additionally, corporate officer number 3, another high-ranking WWE official and member of the board of directors at the time Miss Grant's employment with the WWE, mentioned Miss Grant to sit in the chair near the corporate officer number 3 at the boardroom table during one of the meetings. Upon information and belief, WWE corporate officer knew of other instances of Vince McMahon engaging in inappropriate sexual conduct. Upon the information and belief, numerous independent contractors, employees, as well as executive board members within WWE knew or suspected McMahon's conduct involving Miss Grant, including being able to show explicit photos of Miss Grant by McMahon. McMahon directed a single attorney to negotiate the NDA on behalf of WWE and Vince McMahon, both parties to agreement. Vince McMahon's abuse of Miss Grant did not come as a surprise to anyone because he had faced numerous accusations of sexual misconduct in the past, including in 1994. Referee Rita Chatterton alleged that Miss McMahon had raped her after luring her into a limousine to discuss her career. She recounted it for the New Yorker. In February 2006, Palm Beach Resorts reported that Miss McMahon had shown a nude picture of himself to a tanning booth attendant at Tanza Bar in Boca Raton, Florida, and subsequently made unwelcome advances and finally cornered her in a tanning booth and groped her. Third one here says a former spa manager at California Resort accused McMahon of assault at the resort in 2011. To further illustrate the knowledge of the culture of sexual misconduct, WWE top-level executives not only failed to properly investigate abuse, but also compounded Miss Grant's suffering to make a public statement that trivialized harm that perpetrated upon her. These are just a few examples of how the WWE and its most senior officials knew about and fostered a culture where the venture of harassment and sexual exploitation to women was tolerated to further the business and financial interest of WWE. Given, among other things, the history of misconduct involving other women, noticed and provided McMahon to senior leadership at WWE, rumors about the relationship within WWE headquarters, the widespread sharing of Miss Grant's pictures, including her face, to those inside the company by McMahon, was the atypical hiring of Miss Grant and the atypical advancement of Miss Grant within the WWE. WWE clearly knew of McMahon's misconduct involving Miss Grant, recklessly discrediting facts available to them. So the rest of this looks to be talking about the NDA that Vince refused to sign, which we know about, and Miss Grant's life after this abuse and resulting damages. Detailed herein is Miss Grant's exploited during her time at the WWE is subject to countless depraved, humiliating acts which led to severe and permanent trauma. She's been further traumatized by having to relieve those experiences when giving evidence to the government in connection with their investigation of WWE. So there's a WWE investigation. Indeed, Miss Grant's trauma and ongoing fear of additional retaliation was so severe that she required extended inpatient treatment. Today, she lives with so much anxiety and depression that she's unable to leave her residence for weeks at a time, fearing a PTSD. During this trauma and inability to leave her home, Miss Grant was terminated from employment on January 27, 2023, where she only lost her dream job of managing her building, but the only job she could procure without the need of references. Ms. Grant's loss of income is $80,000 per year. The severe restrictions of the NDA have created a wedge in all of Ms. Grant's relationship and left her in a perpetual state of isolation. Her family has passed away, and she cannot and does not lean on the support of the community due to the NDA's restrictions. Further, Ms. Grant has experienced weight loss, insomnia, rashes, flashbacks to her exploitation, nightmares, panic attacks, and depression. Ms. Grant will go days without brushing her teeth, taking a shower, or washing her clothes. On many days, she does not leave. Ms. Grant will provide Ms. Grant will prove at trial that she will need lifelong treatment because of pain and suffering inflicted on her because of the defendant. Let me double check negligence against the WWE. Let's read that one. Negligence against the WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 305 that is fully stated herein. WWE has the responsibility and the duty as an employer to ensure the safety and protection of well-being of employees, notwithstanding. Let's just look at the counts real quick. What do they say in our count? The counts are, that's count 3. So these are the things they're saying that are like the illegal bits. This is count 1, NDA voided under Speak Out Act. Doesn't count. Count 2, NDA voided under common law. Okay. Count 3, violations of the Trafficking Act against Vince and Laurinaitis. Count 4, participating in venture violations against WWE, negligence against WWE, civil battery against Vince McMahon, civil battery against Laurinaitis and the WWE. Count 8, intentional or neglect an infliction of emotional distress against McMahon and WWE. Count 9, additional neglect and influence against Laurinaitis. Same thing against Laurinaitis and WWE as well. And then it is signed by the lawyers. So that is the whole legal complaint against Vince McMahon. Obviously I gotta do some processing, right? This was not a good read. This was not a fun one, obviously, but this is an important thing to talk about. It just is. I'm gonna need some time. If you're still here, by the way, I appreciate it. I appreciate you, increasing your knowledge on this right now. This is not a good situation. Obviously, the federal government's involved now, so it seems like we might get some answers. Hopefully, we do, and Ms. Grant can get some justice because what was laid out here was very disturbing. It shows neglect from the company. It seems like a lot of people knew via the complaint. I will be posting a video later this week breaking this all down, kind of discussing what's going on and I guess what should be happening here, because this is inexcusable. This just is. I don't care how you cut it. This should not be happening at all. But I'm going to take these thoughts away and get back with you all. Folks, remember, if you're struggling through anything like this in life or at your job or in a relationship, reach out for help. There are resources. We will link resources in the comments. You deserve help. What's going on with you, you do not deserve that life. And I don't want that to happen to anybody. So reach out to, obviously, I guess it's hard to say, right? I guess reach out to local law enforcement, reach out to friends, family, anyone you feel that you can actually get support from. You're not alone. Thank you all as always for watching, and take care, everyone.